Congressman, thanks for joining me virtually here. We talked in person last month, but that's not allowed anymore.
Apparently, right? How things have changed. It is amazing.
Yeah, in just a couple of weeks. It is crazy. So I wanted to start with something you've been pushing, talking about a lot in the last few days, which is vote by mail, talking about making that the norm in Massachusetts. First, can you just spell out for the average voter listening to us what your proposal would mean for how they vote this year? Straightforward, but just how it would work.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different iterations of it, but the most comprehensive, it means a couple of things. One, if you still want to go out and vote at a ballot box or vote at a polling location, go ahead and do it. No issue there. Go for it. But if there is concern that we have that we don't know what the coronavirus's impact is going to be come September 1st or November. We don't know. I mean, God help us if we're still in some sort of shelter in place, but plenty of concern that a virus could come back, or that could, if it's seasonal, there's a mutation or something that could put a lot of us at risk again in the fall. We want to have some sort of backstop there so that you're not dependent solely on people that, one, feel like their health is worth the risk to go out and vote, or two, people that perhaps have already had the virus and that we're essentially shrinking the folks that are going to be willing and able to go to the polls to a very small slice of our electorate that already has some level of immunity. So one way that we can do that and protect against that is to say, we'll just mail you a ballot. And the ballot can come to your house, you can fill it out, and you return it in that same stamped envelope, and it can go right back to the state where they count it up, and then we get the results. There's a bunch of states out there that already do this. Massachusetts does this already for absentee ballots. We can do it a much larger percentage of our population just by sending everybody a ballot. And it's essentially an insurance policy whereby we can ensure that people across our Commonwealth can still have their voices heard and their vote count, even if circumstances are going to prevent them from going to the polls.
So you, and this is helpful. So it wouldn't be no polling places. I mean, public health will partly determine some stuff, I know, but your proposal isn't don't have polling places exist. It's just send everybody a ballot, so that's an automatic option.
Yeah, so there's a, yes, I'm not saying the vote by mail has to replace in-person voting, but to say there should be options. And I think what's so critical at this point, Ted, is that we provide an American public with those options to be able to meet their needs. And, you know, if we are in a circumstance where you are in the midst of a second wave of this, where, you know, who knows, but if we can't get even people in polling locations, maybe that is something we have to address. But I would much prefer to have to address that while there's been a couple of months for our systems to get up and prepared for it, while there's been an investment in the infrastructure that you need, while there's been a public relations campaign to let people know that there's this other option, rather than essentially risking this to the very end, not having the time to set this up right, and therefore essentially to allowing an election to be decided on a much thinner slice of the population. And look, I say that as not only a current elected official and a candidate for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts, but also as just a concerned citizen here. My whole goal is to make sure that our elected officials win elections by winning the most amount of votes that they need to win, not by saying, hey, slice this electorate down, however small that might be, and then hope that somebody else wins out of a small fraction of an electorate rather than having people be able to make that choice themselves.
One other question on this, and then I wanted to ask you about a couple things bubbling up in Congress, which is Secretary Galvin told State House News Service his concern, particularly for your election, your primary, and the primaries in general, September 1st, is how do you know what ballot to send to people who are unenrolled, which we know is a majority of the electorate in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. What do you say to that?
You can send them both, right? So there's a couple ways around it, right? One, you could send them both. Two, you could put on what I think would be a hurdle, but you could have people that aren't enrolled have to request one first, right? You could set up something on the website and say, hey, if we're going to send you one and you're unenrolled, let us know which one to send. But you can also send both. And if you send both, one, you can make sure that there's only one ballot that comes out completed when it comes back. And two, you can make sure if somebody tries to send you two envelopes, that only one counts. And if they send you both, those things get thrown out, right? You can't, I can't walk into a polling location with a separate ballot and fill out two and try to submit them. That doesn't work. And remember,
you can try
right.
And you
when
should
you vote absentee,
Democrat, I think.
Yeah, I won't. Thank you. When you vote absentee, which in Massachusetts we still have. It's a bit technical, but it's a fault absentee ballot. You have to prove that you have to attest that circumstances will prevent you from being able to go to the polls on that day. Right? You also have to sign the envelope. It's a special envelope that the ballot comes in. You have to sign it saying that you're not doing something illegal. Right? You're not filling it out for somebody else. You're not casting multiple ballots. It's against the law. So for states that actually have a long history of vote by mail, there's not a long history of irregularities here. There's no major issue with regards to election interference. I think the far greater risk is that we don't do some of these things, and then all of a sudden we put ourselves at grave risk of having this election decided by a very small swath of the electorate that is not anywhere near reflective of the reality of the wishes that the people across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or the country, by the way, want to have.
So it's amazing, but the last time we talked, the CARES Act was still just beginning to be, we were talking about direct payments, now they're hitting people's bank accounts. CARES Act 2, I'll call it, is being at least discussed now in Washington, or as people are in their districts. The Republicans are complaining that Democrats aren't letting them just put more money into the PPP, the SBA program, because in the Senate, Democrats want it paired with more money for state and local governments. There is concern that money will run out this week. I mean, do you think, is it a bad call to hold that up right now when some of these small businesses, I'm sure you're hearing from them like I am, are struggling to get those loans quickly when we're in deep trouble?
There's no debate at all, I think, on our side that, from my perspective, that small businesses need support and need more funds. I think there are some issues with the PPP program about how effectively some parts of it are working. I'm hearing from restaurant owners in particular saying that some of the provisions there are actually not helpful. And I think there's some issues there that we might have to address. But regardless, I think everybody acknowledges the fact that small businesses are going to need more support. You know who else needs more support? Hospitals, community health centers, individuals and families, more direct cash payment. I mean, there's a lot more help that people need a lot more assistance than we've even got out of that 2.2 trillion. So I think it's a bit disingenuous of some of my colleagues to say, hey, small business need the support, let's raise some money. Sure, so do a lot of other folks. And if we're going to do this, great. I'm not trying to stand in the way of small businesses getting support, but let's make sure our doctors and our hospitals get some of that support as well. Let's make sure they're able to have the adequate supplies of PPE. Let's make sure that individual families are able to make ends meet. And we can do that. The idea that we're just going to cherry pick one slice of this and say, hey, the money's running out. Oh, there's a lot of people that are in dire need now. Let's help them now.
One question we're getting from a lot of people, and you talk to experts, you get briefed as a member of Congress, is just the basic how long is this going to last question. And I realize, you and I aren't doctors by any means or anything, but you do talk to some influential folks. What do you hear from hospital leaders, from the experts in Washington you speak with? Where do you see this going right now for us?
So it depends a little bit as to what you mean by how long is this going to last. And Ted, I think the answer to that is, the honest answer to that is no one is certain, but there's some predictions that we can make with some pretty wide variability here. Right? So in terms of, I think a couple of things, right? One, we need to let the science dictate this, not our own aspirations and not politics. Right? And part of that is just the cold hard reality that the virus, if we do not have control of the spread of this virus, if we try to open up an economy more quickly, it just means more people are going to get sick and more people are going to die. But the second part is that if we do this, our economy at its core is about confidence. It's about confidence that, one, if I put something on a credit card, the credit card company thinks I'm going to pay it, but that I'm also going to get a paycheck. It's about so that I can pay that bill. It's about confidence that I'm going to go out to a restaurant or order a meal and not get sick. And if people don't have confidence that's the case, they're not going to go. And so the health side of this is going to have to lead the economic side of it. And I think what I hope to see, and was heartened by the coordination we're seeing from various governors across the country, is the recognition that for Massachusetts, our ability to do so effectively is going to be linked to Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont, our bordering states. And their ability to do so is going to be linked to their bordering states. And so we are linked in this. Two, that it's going to be a bit uneven, right? There's going to be parts of even some states that can open up. There's going to be some states that open up earlier. There's going to be hotspots that might bubble up with new clusters of infection, which is why we have to have the testing regimens ready to be able to respond quickly. You need to be able to do that contact tracing. You need to have some of these systems set up that aren't wholly set up yet. We have to be ready to unfortunately take some steps back if we are stepping forward and that happens too quickly. But to the point where you really have confidence and you can say, hey, we can go back out to a Patriots game. I can go back out with 60,000 people. I can go to a concert with tens of thousands of other people. I can not have to worry about anything else. I think you are unfortunately waiting for a tried and tested and true vaccine that has inoculated not just the vast majority of the American population here, but people around the world too, because if there's other parts of Europe or Asia that don't have it, if there's people coming in, they're going to infect people, right? And so I think we're a long time away from kind of life as we knew it back in January or February in Massachusetts and Rhode Island.
All right, Congressman, I think we're out of time, but thank you for taking the time to talk with me, and I hope you and your family are healthy.
Hey, thanks so much. Be well.
Take care.